Thank you for joining us here on the hashtag Let's Talk Mental Health campaign, brought to you by the Mail and Guardian in kind partnership with Cipla. Now, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown will be with us for some time, but while the physical and economic impacts are being grappled with in real time, the emotional and psychological scars will take even longer to heal and process. And that is where we find ourselves in this series called hashtag Let's Talk Mental Health. My name is Marcel Gordman. With me today, I've got Professor Renata Schoeman, a well-known psychiatrist. She's based in the Cape. She has a special interest in cognition, eating, mood, and anxiety disorders. Professor Schoeman holds appointments as an associate professor in leadership with the University of Stellenbosch's Business School, where she's also a virtual faculty member. On the other side of the spectrum, she's the convener of the SA Society of Psychiatrists Special Interest Group on ADHD, and she's the co-founder of the Goldilocks and Bear Foundation. Professor Schoeman, thank you so much for your time today. In your experience, how are our children doing this far into this unprecedented time that we find ourselves in?
Marcel, the amazing thing is that children in general are fairly resilient. But now, as the lockdown and the impact of COVID has been prolonged, we are starting to see some effects. Especially our little social butterflies really battle with not being able to connect with their friends. And for them, the return to school was even more awful because they thought they will be able to play, but they're all confined to little squares or circles. They're not allowed to share friends and food and play games and touch each other, and they really do not understand that. Secondly, there's many of them who have experienced loss, especially loss of grandparents, or they experience the tension of the parents in home where there's now maybe financial stresses, or if you had to confine in circumstances which is not necessarily that easy. It's one thing confining in a 5-bedroom house. It's definitely another thing if you have to confine in limited space and there's not really activities that could help you and there's not people that could support you.
You speak about resilience, and I've often heard people say, children are far more resilient than we give them credit for. Is there the fear or the concern that we might put too much emphasis on children having to be resilient?
I think so as well, because we also expect they should just cope. And what we also saw in the teenagers in last year, but they know how to use the technology. Google Hangouts and Zoom is nothing new for them, where the adults more struggled with it. And we saw how the teenagers helped the older people to really adjust to that as well. But for the teenagers specifically, they are maybe less resilient than we think in terms of the part of their life where they have identity formation as a teenager, and they need to test relationships and form romantic relationships and friendships, and it's not there. And what we also see, the group that's really battling is the older adolescents or our young adults. So we tend to forget about them, where they almost have a foreshortened expectation of the future. We can't have the normal matric farewell, go and study, experience the normal student things, where we find the little ones tend to cope a little bit better.
What are, however, some of the red flags that parents and caregivers should be looking out for? If you are dealing with a little one or a younger person or a teenager in your household who perhaps isn't as resilient in processing all the feelings that they're having, what should they be looking out for, and how should they start having that conversation and making the space available for them to feel a certain way?
One thing that is very important is when I ask about symptoms for depression, is often adults or parents go unawares of the symptoms in the child because they say they still enjoy their friends, they're still laughing, when they do things that they enjoy. But when I ask if their house has become quieter, you don't hear your child laugh, your child doesn't listen to music anymore or dance, or is less funny or silly, or they're just more secluding themselves in their rooms, that's definitely red flags. And then the more serious red flags is when we start to see changes in their energy level or changes in their sleeping patterns and their appetite, and even negative statements like I'm unloved or life is not worth living or I'm thinking about hurting myself or killing myself. Obviously, that is not even red flags, that is danger zone for us. So in teenagers, we see different type of symptoms. And I always say if we see behavioral changes or behavioral problems in a teenager, we should assume it's depression until proven otherwise. So our teenagers might become more ratty. They might also withdraw from their friends. They would start to have behavioral problems or maybe even experiment with substances. They will just in general, a complete personality change. You won't know your child anymore. So behavioral changes in a teenager and a quiet child is for me two big red flags.
You're a specialist in the area of ADHD as well. Speak to me a bit about how the current circumstances that we find out, many families find themselves in, the isolation, all the other outside pressures as well. How could that impact on somebody who's already been diagnosed, or a child that's already been diagnosed with ADHD, or now parents sitting saying they're wondering if their child now needs a specialist diagnostic process?
Now that children has been schooled from home and parents had to be more involved and maybe supervised more, they might have noticed for the first time that, my child really battles and now seeks support and intervention for their child. So that is a positive. However, children with ADHD, which are already battling with structure, if there's not structure, they don't function. Now with the school programs being so haphazard, one day we're at school, one day we self-study at home, and all the disruptions over the past year definitely negatively impacted on their schoolwork, and we see some of them really taking strain and falling behind even further. So it has a very negative impact on them. There's a small group of students, though, also those with ADHD, that actually do very well with an online classroom. And also they can fidget when they're on their own. They can move around, watch a little bit of school, move around, watch a little bit of school. And they're often captured by screens. So there's also a minority of them that actually are doing better with this whole mode of technological schooling that we're doing at the moment.
Anxiety is a massive talking point and has been, especially over the last year. Anecdotally, amongst adults, people saying, you know what, I actually just feel like it's a default setting now that I feel anxious all of the time. You actually can't feel the difference between a day when you're feeling anxious and a day when you're not feeling anxious, because we just have so much on our plates. On social media, that adds to it even more so, even if we try and change our physical whereabouts as well. But in children, what kind of impact does the exposure to the adults in their lives, anxiety, what impact can that have on the kids themselves?
It is so important that we need to learn to acknowledge that, to manage our anxiety. So when you're feeling anxious, explain to a child that it's a normal feeling and that is the reasons you are anxious. Otherwise, we pathologize that also to a child and we do not give them the words to help to express it. But at the same time, we have a responsibility as adults to model behavior, not to go into panic station, not to act out on that anxiety, but rather have a conversation. Mama is feeling very stressed and overwhelmed at the moment, but when we're going through difficult periods of time, it's okay to feel like this, but we really now need to take care of ourselves. So it's important that we go for a walk every day. It's important that we get enough sleep and really role model the healthy things we can for our children to teach them also tools of how to deal with anxiety.
Is it important to consider how to talk about hope with your children? I mean, that's a word that I've heard now the last few days, especially where we've seen the next phase of the vaccination registration taking place, with our over 60s being able to register to hopefully get the vaccine when that phase arrives. And a lot of the elderly are talking about how it just gives them some kind of hope. How important is it for us to talk about that with our children, and how do we do that?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because having hope is a crucial ingredient of personal resilience. If you look at all the research about resilience, the one thing they say, be optimistic, have hope. It doesn't mean we live in airy fairyland, but hope also means having courage and the confidence in yourself that you can cope with something.
In your opinion, how can parents and caregivers best support the young people and the children in their care when it comes to their mental well-being?
I think the very crucial thing is to ask, and to really make time to connect with your child, not just in the passing when they climb in the car after school, ask them, how was your day? But really make time, maybe before bedtime or early in the morning when everyone is a bit calmer and it's not so rushed, to really have a conversation. tell me about your day. What was the good things that happened? What was the difficult situations you've been? But to teach a child to have a conversation, that is very, very important. And then the second thing, as I mentioned previously, to model healthy habits. Try to not grab a glass of wine or make statements, I can't get home, I can't wait to get home to grab a glass of wine. You know, that is the wrong message. Rather say, I can't wait to get home so that me and you can go for a walk. You know, or let's listen to some music. You know, or let's spend some time outside, let's eat healthy. You know, so all of those are very important messages. And then the one other crucial thing is that we make sure that we do not spend too much time on our devices. The other thing that is very, very important, working from home forces us to be behind our computer significant periods of time. And even our children is schooling on devices. But it's so important that we also model that, where we switch off, we close the computer, we put our cell phone aside, and we really connect with our friends and our family, and especially with our children. Rather read them a book and have a conversation with them.
Thank you so much. That's Professor Renata Schoeman. Some great advice there for parents and caregivers looking after our little ones and our young people, our teenagers who have formed a part of our lives as we've navigated our way through this pandemic and indeed a lockdown. Now, don't forget, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group is Cipla's mental health partner. Whether you are helping someone or need help yourself, you can always call the Cipla SADC 24-hour free counseling helpline on 0800 456 789. Thank you so much for watching. You're watching the Cipla hashtag Let's Talk Mental Health series in association with the Mail and Guardian. Do share this video. Help a friend or a family member who might be looking for some kind of guidance as we navigate our way through the mental health issues this pandemic has brought with us. Do stay safe, and let's make mental health a priority.